So, welcome to the third session of Hands-on Agile 2025 on February 4th. And it's my great pleasure that we can welcome Jim Highsmith. Jim is one of the signatories of the Agile Manifesto and is heavily involved in figuring out where Agile might go and what agility actually means. And I would like to thank all of you for your busy work because you provided a lot of questions in advance for our Q&A session here. And Jim, do we have 30 minutes or so? I think we have some interesting questions. Excellent. Okay. So, do you think it's necessary to introduce you further? I mean, you're a very well-known thought leader in the Agile space. Or shall we just jump in?
Oh, we can just jump in.
Okay, excellent. So, there were a lot of questions about modern challenges and trends, which I found really interesting. So, by the way, I'm posting all the questions to the chat as well, so you don't have to listen to me. And one of the questions is, in 2025, organizations are moving back to agile fundamentals with integrating advanced technologies like AI and machine learning. And how do you see the balance between simplicity and innovation shaping Agile's future? Is there something like Agile AI?
Well, I think that there's going to be something along those lines. One of the things about simplicity is it's do the simplest thing possible within some context. And those contexts can change. So the simplest thing for one context may not be the simplest thing for another. In fact, I think this is one of the things that has been misinterpreted about Agile is the idea of context. That we have to do these things within context. And I think the same applies to the next era of artificial intelligence. And I think what we're seeing today is a large influx of AI tools in software development and in particular, and I think it will begin to affect everybody to some extent. I know for me personally, it has completely changed the way I write. I've written 6 books and a bunch of other stuff, and I now have a writing companion. His name is Byron, after my grandfather. And we interact on a regular basis. And I'll come up with some wild idea and feed it to Byron, and he comes back with some other ideas. In fact, one time I asked Byron for some input, and he gave me some input, and I wrote him back and I said, "This is pretty bland, beef it up again, be really creative." And he came back with a whole set of new things that were really very useful. So I think everybody is going to have to learn to manage their AI entities, whether you call them bots or agents or whatever, that everybody is going to have some. And so one of the metrics I use when I'm looking at organizations is how much do you utilize artificial intelligence in your job? None. Do you do it once in a while? Do you do it constantly throughout the day? And that question's got to be asked all the way up and down the organizational structure, because it's going to impact management jobs to a great extent, as well as it's impacting others today.
I'm really curious, Jim. So Byron, what model is Byron using?
I'm using ChatGPT Canvas.
Ah, cool. Yeah, I tend to be a bit more involved with Claude in recent times, but yeah, well, I think we should have choice. On the other side, not long ago on LinkedIn, there was an interesting discussion about someone pointing to the efficiency gains that generative AI provides, for example, if you do backlog refinement. And I think it was Tobias Meyer mentioned this is not about efficiency. backlog refine it is about creating a shared understanding what is valuable. So do you see that organizations are embracing new technologies like generative AI, but maybe use them again as some means of accelerating change or improving efficiency? So bypassing actually the true potential of this technology.
I actually wrote a post in LinkedIn about that not long ago and compared the use of efficiency and productivity to drive AI to the use of velocity to drive early Agile implementations, and just as damaging. I railed against velocity for years. Velocity is a productivity measure, and should be used within a team to adjust their processes and practices based on feedback. And it's sort of it's a measure of what you can get done. Trying to take that and grow it into a measurement that you can measure across teams is just ludicrous, in my humble opinion. And I think the same thing is happening in the AI world. Now, a lot of companies have to go after what they think are the low-hanging fruit, the productivity kinds of things. But over time, and that time is getting short, the real use of AI is how is it going to improve our innovation, our organizational innovation, and our product innovation. And those are the places where we've really got to make some gains and stop all this worrying about productivity and worry more about innovation.
I'm curious, just another thought on the side. Generative AI would allow us to actually, as agile practitioners, to bait the hook and feed the fish. For example, uh, create the reports that some managers still are so dependent on and they crave to receive, while we would be more interested in getting them into our vicinity, help them collaborate with the team, get a joint effort moving in the right direction. Right? Is it okay from your perspective to use this kind of technology to actually cater the needs of an older paradigm, of the industrial paradigm, and people who are still somehow stuck within it, instead of helping them to embrace the new?
It reminds me back in the early 1980s when we were just applying computers to businesses. What we would do is we would go into something like a payroll accounting department, and we would track pieces of paper from this person to that person to that person, and it goes in a file cabinet here, and somebody attaches it to something else here, and somebody connects it to the customer base here. And so we automated that flow rather than changing the flow, because automation made it a very different kind of flow. And I think we're somewhat doing the same thing today. We're paving the cow paths rather than trying to figure out if that's the right one to pave. And that's inevitable with a new technology. But I think, again, that ultimately it's going to be about innovation, because the advent of artificial intelligence, I mean, every day or every week I get something from about ChatGPT adding something to it. It adds tasks one day, and it adds research the next day, and it adds Canvas the next week. And it's hard to keep up just with one tool. I use two regularly. I use ChatGPT and I use Perplexity. And I've got several other tools that I use, but those are the two that are my mainstays. And I kind of stick with them because if I move to something like Claude, then I got to relearn the inner workings and how it works. And I'm comfortable with ChatGPT, with Canvas, but it's got some quirks. But I think that it's going to change a lot of things, and I think we just can't anticipate everything that's going to change. So we've got to plan for how do we prepare for the future as opposed to try to predict it. And you plan for the future by saying, okay, what's the chance that this is going to radically change management structures? Well, maybe that's 20% in the next year, but maybe it's 50% in the next 5 years. I've got 3 diagrams that I use when I'm giving presentations. The first is a person sitting down, interacting with an AI bot one-on-one. And the next one is a human with a team of AI bots and people. And the final one is an organization structure full of bots, no people. And if you read things like The Next Reality by Andrew Wang, he gets there in about 30 or 40 years. Now, whether he's right or not, I talked to him one day last year, and I got off the phone and I said, geez, I hope he's wrong.
That's an excellent segue to another question, which is what emerging trends and practices in Agile excite you the most as we look forward into the next years? I mean, we've already talked about artificial intelligence and how it can help us, but what else is out there?
There's always new tools that people can use. There's the artificial intelligence stuff, and it kind of depends on what area you are in. It is really enhancing scientists' ability to do things more quickly. There were at least, I can't remember, 2 or 3 Nobel Prizes last year that were geared to artificial intelligence being a part of the issue. I just saw something this morning in the paper about the artificial intelligence being applied to the CERN particle accelerator in Europe. And so I think the combination of AI and different sciences is going to provide great advances. Just like, for example, the reason that the COVID vaccine was developed so rapidly was in part due to the use of artificial intelligence applied to cell manipulation. And so those are some of the kinds of things I think will happen. In terms of software development, I think it's going to change the landscape pretty rapidly. And so one of the things that concerns me is the impact of AI overall on knowledge workers. We have, if you look at the Industrial Revolution, it's gone through several iterations, but one of the places it's gone is into manufacturing. And now they have, car manufacturers are full of industrial robots. So it has displaced a lot of manufacturing jobs. For the first time, we have a technology that's going to replace a lot of knowledge worker jobs. And so the impetus for us to upgrade our skills is paramount. We've got to be able to figure out what skills we need to improve, how we're going to get there, and how we're going to get there more rapidly. And that's got to be for organizations as well as individuals.
What might be an answer to this emerging trend as knowledge no longer is a mode in general? Of course, there will always be the top 5 world experts on X, right? But what about the rest of the pyramid?
Well, one of the things I've done is going from knowledge to what is it we're really trying to get at? We're trying to get at a capability to do something, a capability to do some job or some series of jobs. And that capability is a function of the knowledge to do that, the experience to do that, the decision-making skills to do that, and eventually the wisdom to do it ethically. And so capability, if you look at the knowledge aspect of it, AI is eminently keyed to doing the knowledge management part of it. A little less so with the experience. Experience is experience. And we know that, the way to get experience is through experience. And there are some ways to speed that up, but there are some ways, there's not as much of a way. When it gets to decision making, there are definitely some tools that you can use to help make decisions, but decision making let me give you an example. I used to do a lot of mountaineering. One of the critical decisions you make in mountaineering is whether to go back or not. You always want to try to get to the peak, but sometimes you run into conditions that are adverse and you don't want to be there. So you want to go back. And so you don't make those decisions from reading a book. You make those decisions for having experienced time in the mountain and taking a look both at this difficulty in the mountain and where and how you're feeling as a climbing team. And so decision making is a really a human aspect that you can get some help with an AI, but it's very human centered. So I think this range of things that you can do to build a capability starts with knowledge, but the real aspect comes from experience, decision making, and wisdom.
The New York Times published an article on Sunday about the CEO of Klarna. So Klarna is a Swedish-based buy now, pay later company that is supposedly IPO. It's going to IPO later this year, and he's very, very AI supported. Let me put it this way. So he claims that they already saved a lot of individual contributors, so they reduced the headcount of the organization. And basically, what he claims is that he will be able, over the next 2 years or so, to reduce the headcount from 5 to 2,000. And do you think he's the outlier because his job is actually to take up the value of the company because it's a pre-IPO state, or is he just expressing thoughts many other people have?
Well, I think it's the thoughts that a lot of people have, and I think there's a lot of people who say, they're gonna lose a lot of jobs. There are other people that say it's going to change the way jobs are done, and therefore enhance jobs rather than take them away. I think there's going to be some of both, unfortunately. Look back at a technology in the 1930s and 1940s. There was a big technology shift. Up until that time, when you called on somebody on the phone, you actually called an operator, and that operator was at a switchboard and would plug in where you needed to go for that call. In the end of the 1930s, excuse me, they came up with automated switches. In the transition from telephone operators, switchboard operators to automated switches, it impacted about 400,000 jobs. Now, it created a lot of jobs. It created jobs in manufacturing and installation and maintenance of those switches, but that required a very different skill set. And how many of those people, of those 400,000, gained a skill set to move into the new job? So I think that's sort of a dilemma we face. And again, it depends on who you talk to. Some people predict that there's going to be a lot of job loss. Some people predict that there's going to be a lot of jobs enhanced. I think what we need to do is to focus on how can we use AI to enhance our jobs so we'll be more valuable in the future.
I fully agree. Do you believe that there will ever be a kind of post-agile era? So, or will agility continue to evolve as a foundational approach to managing complexity? Maybe augmented.
Well, are you talking about little A agility or big A agile?
Both, please.
I think that the concepts behind agility, adaptiveness, resilience, all of those things is going to be important in the coming years. So I think the basic fundamental values behind the Agile movement will continue to be important. Collaboration will continue to be important. It will just change. If you think back to when the manifesto was written, collaboration tools were nearly non-existent. You had some basic internet connections, but you didn't have anything like today's LinkedIn or some of the social media. So what happened back then is that face-to-face teams were really the best way to go in terms of good collaboration. And we did some remote collaboration, but it wasn't very good. That gap has narrowed significantly over the years. And with the upcoming move to VR, AR, and enmeshed environments, we'll be just about as good as face-to-face. Probably not completely there, but a lot closer. So, but basic fundamentals of collaboration still hold, but the technology to do that changes, and we have to adapt to that technology. So anybody that would say today face-to-face collaboration is the only way to go would be wrong.
You see a future in which we have maybe a pure remote approach. So some organizations do that, but at least a hybrid approach.
I think there'll be a hybrid approach. And so what I'm saying is that those two come closer together in terms of their effectiveness. And so there'll be some organizations that go with more face-to-face, other organizations that go with more remote collaboration environments. And so it'll depend again on the context of the issues or the context of the problem you're trying to solve or the context of the organization that you're working in.
Do you have an understanding of the motivation of the leaders that insist on everyone being in the same spot? This return to office policies. I mean, Amazon, we've heard of those, and Tesla. Or is it just a rephrased approach of reducing headcount in the sense that, okay, if you don't like to come, please take a severance package and off you go. Look somewhere else where you want to be.
I mean, I'm not inside the heads of those people that made those decisions, so I don't really know. I would say that there's probably some of each of those kinds of things involved in it. And I think there's definitely some things lost in a lot of situations where you have purely online interaction, remote interaction. But I know plenty of people, friends of mine around here, that work in a remote environment, and they've worked in a remote environment for a long time, and they will continue to do so. So I just think it depends. Now, they primarily work for smaller, high-tech software firms. So I think it also depends on what job position you're in.
Is that an example of what you call adaptive leadership?
Well, adaptive leadership is my version of really what agile leadership is, and it means that you need to adapt to the situation. So, for example, I think there's an evolving role I just wrote about called a choreographer, and it comes from a friend of mine, Dan McClure, who wrote a book called "Do Bigger Things." And basically, what he's saying is the scope of work that we're getting into now in a bunch of organizations is so wide that you need somebody to choreograph what goes on between your team, another team, the supplier, a government entity, a regulatory force, that you need somebody who can deal with all those entities and pull them together. And so Dan calls it a choreographer. And so the skills or capabilities that I think they have to have in order to do that is an adventurousness. I think that's something that's a part of adaptive leadership. You've got to have some sense of adventure and taking some risks, or you're not going to get there. You have to have some curiosity and about learning new things. You've got to learn how to develop a team that can co-create in a collaborative environment, and you've got to be able to reflect and change. So I think the adaptive leadership is an outgrowth of using agile principles and values and extending them into management. And so one of the things that I think is critical to the agile movement is something we've not done a very good job of, which is engaging senior management in agility. Now that's changing quite a bit. And you go into senior executive ranks now, you hear a lot more about agility and adaptability than you used to.
Brings me to another question. What advice would you give leaders that struggle to foster agility in an organizational environment that is still rather rigid?
Here again, it's a matter of context. And this is something, again, that I think is not done enough of. Carol Dweck wrote a book a dozen years ago now it talked about growth and fixed mindsets. And one of the things, I mean, I like the idea of fixed and growth mindset because I think an agile mindset is definitely a growth mindset. But I also think you need more differentiation. So think of agility or adaptability on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being fixed mindset, very little agility, 10 being growth mindset, a lot of agility. And what people need to do is to think about where you are on that spectrum and use that context to implement agile changes or agile transformations. If you're a 1, you're not going to get to a 10 or you're just not going to get there, period. You might be able to move up to a 3 or maybe even a 4 with some concerted effort, but you're not going to make it into a real agile organization unless you have some significant impetus behind it. And all too often, I think agilists are either you're agile or you're not. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think there's a spectrum that grows out of what you need and where you are. And some companies and some organizations don't need to be as agile as others. Not everybody needs to be a 10. Maybe in your industry, 6 is okay. How do you get to 6? Where am I now? So I think contextual kinds of things are really important, and it's an area that's gotten not enough emphasis.
Based on your experience, if organizations start on their path to transform themselves to their appropriate level of agility, let me put it this way, referring to what you just said, how can they measure, air quotes, their progress and whether they actually achieve what they intended to achieve at the beginning of a transformation? Any good ideas, tips?
I guess it depends on what level you're at. And so I think, for example, that ultimately it's got to be measured by customer value. Are you providing additional customer value? So one of the things I did a dozen years ago is I took a look at how we were measuring things, and velocity was really a part of that. And I thought the project management approach at the time was scope, schedule, and cost. And you had to get each of those correct in order to be successful. So I created something called the Agile triangle, which was value, quality, and constraints. And at the top was customer value. And if you don't deliver any customer value, it doesn't matter how fast or how slow or how much it cost or how much it didn't cost. So customer value was really important. And people have come up with better ways of measuring that in today's day and time. I talked about some simple ways in my project management book. They're much better measurements today, but I think you've got to get it. What value is it creating? And one of the things that you got to be careful when you're talking about whether something has succeeded or not. So there's been a lot of angst in the Agile movement about the fact that it's in decline, it's dead. I want to read you a little blurb from a Forrester report that's just been released. And this is a research firm, Forrester Inc., is very well known for their analytical research. And they issue this report every couple of years on the state of agility. And despite the buzz around Agile's supposed decline, a commanding 95% of professionals affirm its critical relevance to their operations. This statistic, coupled with a 58% of business and technology professionals prioritizing Agile adoption, paints a clear picture Agile is not just surviving, it's thriving and not going away, yet it does need improvement. And I think the bulk of the Agile community is trying to move towards that kind of an approach or that kind of result. There are plenty of people who are on the Agile is dead side. I happen not to be one of them.
Oh, I fully agree with the notion. Agile is just changing. I find it always interesting that a mindset that puts change in the center of everything can be so resistant to change, right? Speaking of change, there has been a development recently between PMI on the one side and Agile Alliance on the other side, and you probably have more insights than anyone else here. That's around. What is your take about the situation? Is this the sign that many people say, "Oh my goodness, now it's all over"? Agile is indeed dead. It's now a subsidiary of PMI.
I just made my second major post this morning on that issue. I made one a couple of weeks ago when it first came out, and I did another one this morning. And I think what's happened, it's happened within the Agile community, and it's happened between the Agile community and the project management community. Within the Agile movement, you hear things like Agile is against documentation or Agile is against planning. Somebody made those comments in a LinkedIn post a year ago, and I said, we solved those problems 20 years ago. Do you have any new problems to solve? And so I think what happens is we get caught up in old stories about how things used to be 10 or 15 years ago, and those stories are not relevant anymore. I've just sat through 4 or 5 different sessions put on by the Agile Alliance, by PMI, by the combination, by somebody who came up with the webinar that included those. And if you listen to Pierre, who is the CEO of the PMI, he sounds pretty agile, and he sounds committed to incorporating agility within the PMI framework. And if you look at the PMBOK 8, which is just about to be released, the new PMBOK, it is full of agility types of things. So I think we have some old stories about PMI and project management that are no longer valid. They were valid, they may have been valid 15 years ago, but they're not valid today. I see I wrote another article about this, the tsunami wave approaching us, and that tsunami is AI, and it's huge, and it's going to change everything. And I've read enough of enough different people. I don't know whether the timing will be 1 year, 3 years, 6 years, 10 years, but a hell of a lot is going to change. And I think to deal with those kinds of things, I think the marriage of PMI and the Agile Alliance is a good thing, because I think in combination will be a lot better prepared to face the future than as separate entities.
So from your perspective, the Agile project manager is no longer a contradiction, but actually more kind of future trend?
Yes. Now, I think the future trend is more hybrid. What I mean by hybrid is there are situations where you need a predictable methodology. And there are situations where you need an adaptive methodology or an agile methodology. And so, again, I sort of like 1 to 10 differentiators, which I use to talk about the difference between a project with a technology that was something that you really knew very well, and not requirements that didn't change much, being a 1, and a project where you had very new technology that you didn't know much about and rapidly changing requirements as a 10. And do you need the same methodology for attacking both of those problems? And the answer is no. You need a hybrid. Even within a very agile project, there are parts of it that need to be very predictive. And just within a predictive project, there are parts of it that need to be agile. And that's the hard skill to learn. What I've learned over the years is it's easy to take a framework and say, do this. It's hard to take a framework and say, do this part, pull this in from over here, pull this in from over here. That's the project management, Scrum Master, Agile consultants skill that is lacking in our industry.
I fully agree. Waterfall, air quotes, is not necessarily a bad approach. There are scenarios where waterfall is totally fine.
I built a lot of waterfall-based projects in the 1980s, which was appropriate for that day and time where computing was, if not as relevant today.
And by the way, it always helps to read the original concept of waterfall, as a risk mitigation practice. It's not malicious by design, so it's very important to understand. So, do we have a 3 minute for a final question? Because of course we need to ask that, So if you were to rewrite the Agile Manifesto today, would you add or change any principles based on how work has evolved over the past 2 decades and what is ahead of us? Because I believe that this AI tsunami is really taking shape. This is, and it will be more impactful as we may imagine right now in the long term.
Well, number one, I wouldn't rewrite it. It's a question we get pretty frequently as manifesto authors, but I wouldn't rewrite it. The manifesto was written at a certain point in time to solve a certain set of issues, and it has been useful far beyond what we ever thought it would be, or intended it to be, or envisioned it would be. And I think the main reason for that is that prior to the Agile Manifesto, different methodologies and approaches were more practice and process oriented. They really didn't have values and principles behind them. And so one of the things that I think made Agile, the fact that it's still going 25 years later, is the fact that it had values and principles behind it. That said, it was for a time in a particular environment, and you got 17 people together who just sort of, there was not a lot of structure to it. It was kind of who knew who, and who knew who. I knew Kent Beck, I knew Martin Fowler, I knew Alistair, and somebody else knew somebody else. And we put that group together, and in 3 days came up with the manifesto, which was a pretty awesome event given the force of history. If you took those same 17 people today, I doubt you could get them to agree on what day it was. So the question remains, who would you get together to write that? It is so ubiquitous in the industry today, you'd probably need 8 or 10 different manifestos, or 20 or 30. So I don't think that's a question at least put to the manifesto authors that's relevant today. I think that what's relevant is, how do we take what's there and enhance it or embellish it or modify it to today's environment? And one of the first ones that did that was actually a group that I put together in 2004 to form the Agile Project Leadership Network, because we didn't think the Agile Alliance was putting enough emphasis on project management, and they were trying to say we didn't need a project manager. And what this group was saying is we needed a different kind of project manager, an Agile project manager. And we wrote the Declaration of Interdependence, which was taking the basics of the Agile Manifesto and rewriting them into project management terms. And I think that's the kind of thing that goes on today. Take the basic principles, take the basic values, and modernize it to what you need to do today.
Good things take time.
Yeah.
But maybe 2 decades. But finally we arrived. So, Jim, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us and being here with us, and helping us understand where the whole thing might be heading, and that Agile is not lost. On the contrary, it's alive and kicking, and that we have very interesting times ahead of us. And
Yes, we do. And so it's, even 25 years later, it's still, things are new, and it keeps me excited.
I think we live in very interesting times, and this is not supposed to be, the Chinese version of putting it, But I think we have the privilege of going through a paradigm shift of epic proportions. Maybe just only comparable to the introduction of electricity or something like that. And I'm really curious to figure out where it's going to lead us. Jim, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.